When there's light on the inside of someone and somebody has a relationship that's close to Allah, they are very sensitive to who you are as a person and what your needs are. They're full of rahmah on the inside. They're full of fear and they're very concerned with their own behavior rather than the concern of somebody else's behavior. I've become increasingly wary of religious people, and not least because of the quote of Sheikh Darqawi, which ironically was said over 200 years ago in one of his letters. Now, if you don't know anything about Sheikh Darqawi, by the time this person died, Rahimullah, he had something like 100,000 followers. He was a sheikh from Morocco, incredibly influential, very much in trouble with the establishment at the time, incredibly vocal. This was a man of Allah, there's no doubt. And he wrote a series of letters that students used to write to him, and then he used to write back to them. And one of the things that he said in one of his discourses was basically that, we are now living in a time in which people have become outwardly more religious and inwardly more irreligious, outwardly more godly and inwardly even more ungodly, right? And as I've said, this was said over 200 years ago. And I think now, if there's any time in history, now is one of those times where it's really, really bad now. I have personally experienced, and I'm sure you have, anybody who's watching and listening to this, I'm sure you have as well, that you can often get very much hoodwinked by somebody that seems to be incredibly religious. So somebody, whether it's a man who has the outward religious appearance of the prayer cap and is going to the mosque 5 times a day, and they've been on Hajj and they've been on Umrah and they've been to Palestine, and, every word and everything that they say is mashallah and inshallah, and, their speech sounds very religious, right? And the garb is very religious, and everything in the house when you go to visit, it shows nothing but religiosity, and everything they talk about is religious, right? Whether it's a man or it's a woman. But when it comes to their actions, when it comes to business dealings, they screw you over. When it comes to just having a general interaction with them, you never kind of feel quite relaxed with them because they're always criticizing you, always making you feel small, always making you feel like you're a lesser human being. And when it comes to standing up for justice, very real justice, they don't tend to have the spine for it. And when it comes to understanding what's really going on in the world, they actually have absolutely no clue. And usually they've made a number of decisions in their lives, in their personal lives, that contribute to injustice somewhere else. They either have no idea that they're doing that, or they know they're doing it, but they just turn a blind eye to it because they're actually incredibly selfish people and incredibly narcissistic. So this is what I mean by people. I presume this is what Sheikh Darqawi meant as well, about people that are, outwardly religious. They're doing everything to show you that they're very religious people, and it seems to be for the people. It doesn't seem to be for Allah. They have none of the inward humility. They have no real fear of Allah on the inside, and they have no real rahmah. Like if somebody has a high rank with Allah, that would be somebody that would be very much in fear of Allah. So they would be very careful to break the heart of the other. They'd be very careful to press on somebody else's heart, because Allah has taught us that the heart is the most valuable thing. In the Quran, Allah says that, if this trust was given to the mountains would collapse under the weight of the trust that's given to them, as in if the Quran was revealed to the mountains. So that tells us that the heart's very strong, but also tells us that the heart is very valuable. So to break the heart of another, to impose on another heart, I think is a very, very big deal. And these people, a lot of us, we feel very guilty because that person seems very religious. And we feel like, if that person's very religious, if we were to call out their behavior, or if we were to cross them in some way, that Allah would be very cross with us, that Allah would cross us in some way. And the reality is a lot of these people inwardly are very irreligious. There are extreme examples as well of people that have shown a lot of outward piety. And then, there have been scenes with those people where inwardly, afterwards it's been revealed that they were the polar opposite of the piety that they were showing, like complete opposite of the religiosity that they were showing in very extreme ways. And I'm sure you can think of an example in your own life of somebody like that. And at the same time, we do have people that are not that outwardly very religious. They don't necessarily have the outward religiosity, the outward religious appearance, but they are very, very conscious of Allah. They're very careful in their business dealings. They're very good in their character, in the way that they speak to others. They're very careful not to break somebody else's heart, not to basically burden anybody else. They're very, very good people, but these people don't get taken seriously for their status with Allah because they don't show any of the outward religiosity. And that's kind of the irony of the world that we're living in today, I think. And it causes so many issues in so many ways. Not least because, number one, a lot of these people that have the outward religiosity, they do a lot of policing. And they're constantly policing other people in a very narcissistic way, really, because they're only doing it really for their own nafs. They're only doing it to establish their own superiority and their own command. And by them policing other people, they actually put other people off the religion. They actually put them off the deen. A lot of these people, because we consider them to be religious, we end up trusting them with things. We either trust them for our children's education, we trust them with our amana in some way, and then we get deceived. And I think it's really important for us to be able to start seeing past the outward religiosity and the outward religious appearance. You know, we haven't been given the wisdom, we haven't been given the knowledge or the perception to be able to see into people's hearts, but actions speak for a lot. And the eyes tell a lot as well. The eyes of somebody gives a lot away. And if you are just sat in somebody's presence and you feel a darkness, you feel a vibe that just makes you uncomfortable or unsettled, something is not right there anyway. And I think a lot of us, we just don't trust our feelings enough because we convince ourselves that, you know, what we're seeing rationally, like what we look at with the brain, because we see this outward religiosity, we just assume that this person must have a really high rank with Allah. There was a whole host of things that kicked off 4 or 5 years ago in the entrepreneurial community where a lot of people, especially like single women, single mothers with children, you know, they spent their life savings on courses because somebody had used religiosity to draw them in. And turned out these people were actually not that religious at all. And they were actually just very capitalist and very just interested in making money for themselves. And they got deceived by it. There have been other situations where women have ended up marrying men because they think that those men are very religious, that they will take care of them because they have the fear of Allah. And they end up discovering that that person is the complete polar opposite of that. Very hard-hearted. They end up in, you know, situations of domestic abuse, domestic violence, those kind of things. And it's because they deceived with the appearance on the outside. And at the same time, on both sides, whether it's men or women, they tend not to give a second look to somebody that doesn't seem that outwardly very religious, but actually might be very conscious of Allah on the inside. And we need to start really looking beyond outward appearances if we want to make sure that we don't get misled, if we want to stop putting our trust in these people that are actually going to ultimately deceive us. You know, hypocrites are walking amongst us. They've always walked amongst us. There were hypocrites in the mosque of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They were praying side by side with him. There have been hypocrites in many established Muslim nations that have been in very high ranks that have prayed alongside other Muslims. They were the munafiqun, they were hypocrites. I think a really good measure is really if you're sat in that person's company and that person just makes you feel uncomfortable, something isn't right. When there's light on the inside of someone and somebody has a relationship that's close to Allah, they are very sensitive to who you are as a person and what your needs are. They're full of rahmah on the inside. They're full of fear and they're very concerned with their own behavior rather than the concern of somebody else's behavior. And that's how you can normally tell. If you feel comfortable in somebody else's presence, the way people used to feel and the way people have described they used to feel comfortable in the presence of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that you could be who you are and that you weren't getting judgment for it. We need to really start looking at people in that way, and we need to start becoming people like that as well ourselves. And that doesn't mean that we give free license for everybody to behave however they want, whenever they want. I'm not saying that at all. But we've been told over and over by the Quran that is approach people with wisdom, and we need to be very careful about that in how we approach other people and how we police other people, because ultimately this has just become incredibly counterproductive. We have armies of guys on social media that are constantly criticizing women for having a hair sticking out under their hijab and just giving them a really hard time and not allowing these women to express themselves. And all it does is actually just irritate them and put them off. And then these same men complaining about not being able to find a wife. So they really just set themselves up for failure. But I think we really need to get away from judging people on the outward. And again, I will just say that I know we can't see the inward of somebody, but we have to learn to trust our heart and we have to learn to trust our gut and we have to learn to really tune into how is that person making us feel when we're in their company. If something feels very off about that person, then we should learn to trust our gut on that.